welcome everyone at FAMS and the annual general meeting. Our previous webinars and info sessions you can find on YouTube /@ FAMS Media 1957. And 1957 was when we were established, founded. The opinions expressed by contributors are not necessarily those of FAMS and not necessarily endorsed by FAMS. Today, keynote speaker is Jim Cassimatis of the Bereavement Authority of Ontario, the BAO. They are overseeing the licensing and the regulations of the funeral industry, basically, and for Ontario. Our webinars will start again in September, and more will be announced in newsletters. If you have any suggestions for a great subject and or speaker, let us know at info@fams.ca. Today's team of co-hosts are members of the FAMS board. If you want to be part of this wonderful team, yes, then contact info@fams.ca. We will be very happy to have you because we are a very nice team together. So here's the land acknowledgement for virtual gatherings. We begin by acknowledging that although we are meeting virtually, we are on land that has been inhabited by Indigenous people for many years and continues to be home to people from many Indigenous nations. We recognize and affirm the Aboriginal and treaty rights of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work, live, die, and be buried on this land. So I would welcome our speaker for today, Jim Cassimatis, Registrar with the BAO Bereavement Authority of Ontario, to talk about what the BAO does and what his position as registrar entails. Jim Cassimatis joined the BAO in 2021 as a Director of Operations following a 32-year career with the Ontario Public Service, OPS. He has been an Assistant Deputy Minister for the last 9 years of his OPS career in a variety of roles and ministries. He was named CEO Registrar on March 5, 2024 by the BAO Board of Directors, having served as interim CEO Registrar since December 2022. A collaborative and solutions-oriented leader, Jim has a track record of building capacity and growing staff in the organizations he has led. He has had roles in finance, infrastructure, and information technology planning, policy development and analysis, consumer protection, and client operations, and many more tasks. So more info at the BAO.ca. And I would say, take it away, Jim.
Thank you, Ellen. I have a presentation to go through. I'm a recovering civil servant, having spent my career there. And I'm now at the BAO, which is a provincial authority created under provincial legislation. And so I will tell you a bit about what it does, the services we provide, some of the regs we enforce, some consumer protection, awareness, how to file a complaint, and then how you can contact us in the future. So we were created under a piece of legislation that has created a number of authorities. There's RICO for real estate agents, TICO for travel agents, there's OMVIC for car dealers, and there's the BAO for the bereavement sector. So we license funeral establishment operators and individuals, cemetery, crematorium, and alternative disposition operators. Alternative disposition just means there's a water cremation methodology, and if you want more information, I can provide that. We also license transfer service operators and the sales reps who sell bereavement services. A note here, we are not funded by tax dollars, but rather by the licensees themselves. In terms of our services, our website is twofold. There's a part that focuses on providing information to the public. So you'll be able to see a public register on the first page you go to at the BAO.ca. So that way you can see at the bottom of that page on our public register if the individual you're dealing with is licensed, if the establishment is licensed, if they have any conditions on their license. So again, it's all transparent and available to you. We have a consumer information guide. It's available online. You can call us. We can mail you a copy of it, or you can go to your local funeral establishment, funeral home, and you could pick up a copy there. And I'll show you at the back our phone and email contact details. We employ some inspectors. We go out and inspect 200 to 300 to 400 establishments or licensees every year, just to ensure that what they're doing is, according to the Act, and they're fulfilling their legislative duties. And resolving complaints, I will talk about that in more detail in a minute. So we do encourage all families to convey their end-of-life and aftercare wishes. This will help families who are, I would say, vulnerable because, they're not thinking straight. I know I wasn't when both my parents passed away. And so if you know what they want to do, it just kind of reduces that stress. You have, you can specify whether you want a burial, a cremation, a green burial, or hydrolysis, which is like a water cremation that dissolves the human remains, and you end up basically with the ashes like you would in a regular cremation, but without the emissions of a crematorium. Again, that's a personal choice, and conveying that to your family would likely help. There are two ways you can do so. You can make a pre-arrangement, and so they know exactly what you want. You can also prepay. And a lot of families or the children of the deceased sometimes get confused between the two. They think if there's a pre-arrangement that it's been paid for. That's not always the case. So the more clear you are with your family and your wishes and the arrangements, the less confusion there'll be all around. Occasionally, we get complaints that a funeral home won't honor a prepaid contract when in fact it was only a pre-arrangement. So I can't emphasize that enough to make that distinction and to convey that. If you do prepay, we monitor that payment regularly. Annually, they must submit financial statements. We do not want to see that money from consumers sloshing around in the bank accounts of operators. It has to be held by a trustee. There has to be an annual statement by the trustee so that there's no confusion where that money is held. It has to be held by a funeral operator, by an approved trustee, so they know who they can invest your prepayments with. And we actively review those the financial compliance of licensees. Let me pause here. Any questions so far? No questions? Okay, I'll keep going. Ask questions at the end.
Yes, let's keep going, I guess.
Okay.
I can keep track of anybody keeping their hands up.
Sure. Our licensees are covered by a particular act. It lays out all the rules they must follow for everything from what is a licensed service, who can sell a licensed service, how monies are to be tracked and recorded for prepayments, how cemeteries operate. So it's all there. I happen to be the registrar as well as the CEO. So as registrar, I'm the one who can suspend licenses, revoke them, or place conditions on individual licenses, either of individuals or of establishments. So I think you know this because I saw an earlier slide where you did some comparison shopping, which is excellent. So by law, all price lists must be posted on licensees' websites. So that will allow you to compare. And if they don't post, please let me know because they should be. And when we go for inspections, that's one of the first things our inspector will do to see what does the online presence look like.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Is it the last time I went to look for price lists, it asked me who I was and what I wanted before it would give me information on prices. Is that sufficient, or do they have to have the lists for people who don't who want to compare prices without self-identifying?
Yeah, we're not thrilled that they ask for this contact info, but they're not prevented from doing so. And there's nothing wrong with you saying that you are just shopping, as is your right. So you give them the minimal information. If you find they're asking for too much information, I can understand them wanting to know who's on their website, who's shopping. They can reach out to you. They are a business after all. So I don't begrudge them for that, but sharing the price list cannot be conditional of providing a lot of details. So by all means, let them know your intention, your shopping, and there's nothing wrong with that. I hope that's satisfactory.
I see more hands up. Janine first.
I was just looking, I was looking at the consumer guide, and but I can't find it at this moment. I thought it was on page 14, but it says quite clearly that that the prices must be posted on the website. I was doing some research for FAMS before, and most of the places I looked at did not post the websites. And I think that people are not following the law, and they should absolutely, to Judith's point, they should not be asking who I am. To be posted on the website means I go on the website, it should say price list, I should be able to see it. And I'm quite upset that this is in the legislation. But you know, to my mind, the BAO is not really putting any backbone to that. And I would really ask you to maybe speak to the members and say it's clear in the legislation, post it. Nothing to do with who I am, anything, just post it, because I do not feel they are adhering to the legislation, and they're actually getting away with it.
Thank you for that. And, you know, we do have 10,000 licensees. Like I said, we only do 300-400 inspections a year. We count on you bringing some of these licensees to our attention. We have no qualms following up with them directly. We can issue a reminder to them. We do many reminders throughout the year, but sometimes they think that doesn't apply to them. So if you give us the names of the operators, we are happy to follow up with them. But we do regular reminders as well. It's baked into our inspection checklist. And I'm not saying that's perfect, but as soon as we know of a particular licensee not complying, we reach out to them directly.
I guess I would say, I don't want to add to the burden of FAMS, who are all run by volunteers, but I guess I would say that maybe FAMS should we know all the ones that are not on there. It's the vast majority, in fact. And I think maybe a whole list of that should be sent to the BAO with a complaint,
By all means, please do. We'd be happy to receive it.
Great, thank you very much, Janine. Then we have Pamela and Mary Nash. So Pamela first, please.
Thank you. And just briefly, and just to follow up on Janine's comment. So I originally chaired that committee, the Industry List Committee, and that's where we started. I said, we are familiar, I, in another capacity, had a pre-existing relationship with your predecessor. So we know what the BAO does and where, the FAMS leaves off and BAO begins. I think you'll find FAMS has a fairly deep understanding of the industry from the consumer perspective. But what was interesting was that I said, well, okay, first of all, you have a list, as you've already mentioned, of those organizations which have sort of been on your bad list. So we'll check the BAO first, make sure that the organizations we recommend are not on your bad list. But secondly, the obvious thing is their price list should be on their website. And I'll tell you something, we just couldn't even begin to develop a list using that as a secondary criteria. It was impossible.
Wow.
So this is a fairly, and it was with those operators, some of whom are very reputable, have excellent reputations in their communities, but don't have the infrastructure to really provide to the same degree, say, a large multinational might be able to do. So I'm thinking there may be it's a problem, but I'm not sure what the solution would be. And I think just sort of waving a big stick might not be the solution. But on the other hand, the consumer's in the dark, and that's just not a good thing. And I'm saying you can't even click through with your information. It's just, you've got to ask for it and it'll be sent to you. And so that's obviously a long way from making it available on your website. Anyway, I just wanted to add that as some color. And thank you for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the comments and the color commentary. I assure you, if we find out, if we are made aware of any non-compliance, we will act on it. Any effort you make on compiling a list, even an incomplete list, we will act on it. So all I can say is I encourage you to share that with us. We wrote, it's a pretty professional sector. They want to do the right thing. Often when they're updating their price lists, sometimes they're not technologically advanced and they think they're updating their price list and it goes dark on the website. So there's been some honest mistakes in the past as well. But I assure you, we will act on that list if you give it to us.
Great, thank you, Jim. Then we have Mary Nash, please.
Yes, hello. I note in one of your very few beginning slides to this presentation that you say you should communicate your wishes, put them in writing, and also put them in your will. However, I've been long associated with various information facilitating the helping people to plan their funerals, and we advise not to put it in your will because the will is usually read way after the funeral. So that is a useless, it's more likely that you should write them down and then tell your family and relations that what your wishes are, but don't put them in your will because it just doesn't make sense.
You're in terms of the sequence, you are correct. The will gets notarized later and probated later. However, I can't tell you how many complaints we receive that are not complaints. For instance, a person passes away. This person remarried. The adult kids never liked the remarried spouse. The spouse believes and may have a will that to as the executor. The adult children will dispute that. And the poor funeral home has to be assured of from whom to take direction. And what happens is if the adult kids are not happy or any other party is not happy with that decision, they file a complaint with us. We are not there to adjudicate from whom to take direction. So the will is a very instructive document to our licensees from whom to take direction. That's why I'm encouraging it. Even if it's not probated right away, it is an evidence as to the will of the deceased. So that's why we encourage it still.
Oh, great, excellent, because I always say, also when I talk with people or speak at residential homes or whatever, that the will gets read after the funeral.
Yeah.
And but it is good to know that it is an extra safeguard for legal disputes. I never thought of that.
Yeah, so the way the legislative framework is structured, the licensee must be satisfied from whom they're taking direction. And if they're not, they're going to tell the opposing sides to sort it out in court. They are not going to adjudicate, and neither will the BAO. That's not our job.
Right.
So anything that clarifies who has the right to, as the executor, which conveys the wishes. There are just so many family dynamics that come out after a parent is deceased, for instance, or it could be a child deceased and the parents are separated. And then you have parents who are disputing what the, what type of disposition there should be. So a will just clarifies all of that.
Right, even though a child wouldn't have a will, probably.
Right.
But I see, thank you. And I see there is another hand up from Pamela, and I would like you to know, people, that we will still have some opportunity to ask more questions after Jim has completed his presentation.
Sorry, I just wanted to wrap this conversation. Just full disclosure, I'm a lawyer and I actually do wills and estates. So both are right. Everybody's right here. When the will is, the whole concept of will reading is kind of archaic. There's really, you have a copy of the will you typically find in a safety deposit box, and it's probated at some point later. The information in the will is always helpful. However, I would always recommend that a person write their wishes with respect to how the funeral is to be held or where or whatever, separately from the will, and that document can be available to the family, and this presumes there's no dispute. So I think Jim's point, and it's a good one, is that where there is a dispute, then the will be the document that decides the issue. It doesn't have to be probated or read, it just has to be retrieved. And that's basically it. And I just wanted to say, by all means, give your instructions before, don't put it in the will, do that in addition. But if there's any dispute, the executor, executrix in the will be the person who will make that decision and who the funeral home can then look to. So I just wanted to end that, and I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And yeah, and the last point is usually when there isn't a will and there isn't written instructions, that's when the disputing parties in a family usually end up in court as well to sort it out. So, and for Pam, as the lawyer in the room, the ministry is in the process of enacting a priority of persons legislative amendment So even without a documentation, it's enshrined from whom a licensee can take direction from. It's basically modeling the BC statute. And so I'm hoping in the next year or two that gets enshrined, because that is by far the vast majority of our complaints.
Thank you. I'm actually glad to hear that. Margaret Boyd and I have commented on that proposal, and that was part of our recommendation.
Great.
I'm glad to hear.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, continue on, Jim, and then we will have some more opportunity to ask questions later.
Sure. So our consumer information guide keeps getting updated. It's really important consumers understand what they, we've now added, like if you look at the version in the last year, we've added sections on what you must purchase, what are the minimum. It's amazing with families, they become suddenly very price conscious after someone passes away, and there's some corners you can't cut. So there are some professional services that must be charged. So the guide has some updated information on that. And again, read the contract, and which is very difficult to do when someone is in a state of shock. But if there is a dispute that comes to us and someone is contesting it, we have to rely on the contract that's been signed. Whether the person knew what they were signing or not, that unfortunately is the reality. Recently we have a notice to the consumer page, and we also post these on our social media accounts. Fake obituaries is a thriving business where what these companies do, that by the way are outside of Ontario, they employ IT tools like web scrapers. They scrape the obituaries on funeral home websites. They create their own site. They get those on Google, so you hit those instead of the funeral home's site, and there'll be sections where you can pay for lighting a candle, planting a tree, sending flowers, and these sites, reap most, if not all, of the money, and the family never sees anything. So we're trying to educate the consumer. It's a very difficult whack-a-mole type of scam, because we shut one down in Quebec, and the founder of that one, well, we didn't shut it down. A class action lawsuit shut it down, only to have it resurface under a different name again in Quebec. So we have no jurisdiction. All we can do is educate the public. But these things happen increasingly. Like over the last 10 years, there's been an increase we call it obituary piracy, where they put up these sites. If it's any solace, a family can call this site and say, we do not authorize you to post our family's obituary. Often they do not accept that from a funeral home. They want to hear from the family directly. So this is just unfortunately a horrible thing to stay vigilant on, but that's a reality. Unlicensed grave plot sales. So there are, especially in the Greater Toronto area, but increasingly in other parts where real estate prices have gone up, you have enterprising individuals who think they can sell grave plots because, after all, it's real estate, isn't it? So, which is, of course, not allowed. And so, again, going to the public register, ensuring that that person is licensed to sell, just protects the consumer. There are operators that we've shut down who continue to operate. And so, again, going to our public register helps protect you. We, to the best of our knowledge, try to stay on top of this, but we can't police every criminal activity, can we? And then that goes for revoked licenses. So if you can revoke the license, they can continue to operate unbeknownst to us, or they open up a different address or a different website. And it's just, there's no reference on the public register there. So again, if you don't see it, question them or question us. Again, in terms of complaints, the complaint has to be about a licensee not operating within the parameters of the legislative framework. It's not to adjudicate family disputes. We have zero legislative authority to force a reimbursement. We just never received that power. And so, but happily, 99% of licensees want to do the right thing. And so if there was a confusion with the cremation, usually they'll waive the cremation fee. Or if there's a confusion with the type of casket, usually they'll waive the casket fee. When sometimes families, when they're grieving, they want a waiver of the full funeral costs. And again, that's not something we can order or enforce. So if the two parties can't come to an agreement, then obviously we recommend legal counsel. When we do review the complaint, it's always against what the Act and the regs say. And then we will respond to the complainant within 30 days is our service standard. And we always give a copy of that to the licensee as well. And again, we have these contacts, these resources. We have our website. We have an online magazine called Beyond that features services, features communities. We have the Consumer Information Guide, which you are all aware of course. And then if you have any other general inquiries, you can always email them to us. That email address is monitored 5 days a week, of course. So that is the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take any more questions.
Thank you. Jim.
My biggest concern is the insurance industry that sells insurance for funerals. They really are high-pressure people, and I don't see any legislation or any concerns with how they're controlled.
So an insurance policy is a legal means and product to ensure the payment of your funeral. We do not recommend it for a couple of reasons. One is if you stop paying your policy, like if you miss a monthly payment, the policy may be null and void, number one. Number two, you are not, so your policy is for a set amount and you are not protected against inflation. If you prepay your funeral at a funeral establishment, and let's say you buy $10,000 worth of services, and 5 years later, it's now $12,000 or $13,000, the funeral establishment still honors it at what you paid 5 years earlier. So you are protected against inflation. Or if the service, I don't see this happening often, but if it ends up being $9,500, that extra $500 from the prepaid contract goes back to the consumer. So for those reasons, we recommend prepaying the contract with a funeral establishment. And as I mentioned, on an annual basis, we receive trustee statements. We ensure the that money, that certificate is there for the consumer. That's what we do. And it is our preferred means, but that's the way the act was created. Insurance is a legal product, but we don't recommend it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Philip Sims, may I speak for a moment?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. A couple of decades ago, I was a licensed life insurance agent, and I saw advertisements for, they called it burial insurance. So I priced them out, and they are more expensive, cost per thousand, than the most expensive life insurance product we were selling at the time. So even though they're a small amount, say $10,000 or $20,000 or something, they are a life insurance contract, but they are expensive. So just be aware of that.
Yep, agreed.
Also, they look like they're coming from the Canada Pension Plan. They look very official government.
I see a hand up, Kathleen. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation, sir. What did you say the website was?
The BAO.ca.
Okay, well, I did Google that, and when I do BAO.ca, I get an AI.
No, it's the THEBAO.ca.
Okay, well, there's a very useful other BAO.ca that is definitely, it's just selling services.
So
The reason I Googled that was because you did mention in passing that one has to be licensed to sell a grave plot. That's not the case. My understanding is if you own the plot.
right. Well, but to own it, you must have purchased it, right? And you must purchase it from a licensee. That's all.
But then it can be sold.
Then the interment rights holder, the family, the citizen can in turn sell it. Correct.
Thank you. Well, that is very confusing. Thank you for correcting me. So it's thebao.ca. Well, you should Google bao.ca and see what you get.
No,
Yeah.
I've been caught with that too, Kathleen. So
Unfortunately, when the BAO was created 8 years ago, BAO.ca was already taken. So that's why we had to resort to the BAO.ca.
It's very hard to get the DNS or domain name for websites.
I'm happy to make the presentation available to all of you.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
And you will see on the last page with the contact info, the website, the phone number, that sort of thing. So, Ellen, I emailed it to you. So feel free to distribute that to your members.
Thank you very much, Jim. That's excellent. I see Mary Nash has her hand up. Mary, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question regarding new cemeteries. For about the last 2 years, there's been a campaign going on to reduce the fee, which was boosted up to $165,000 for new cemeteries.
Yeah.
Has the BAO had any reconsiderations of that fee?
No, so that fee was $100,000. And on January 1st, 2022, it went up to $165,000. This fee is for the care and maintenance fund of a cemetery. So how do you use this fund? Well, a cemetery operator can only use the interest generated. Cemeteries are to be in perpetuity. So what happens if the cemetery corporation or the board go bankrupt? The cemetery becomes abandoned. Our legislation, the default is that cemetery will transfer to the municipality it's in. Municipalities have parks and rec staff and equipment to maintain the cemetery. Well, that is going to be a burden on the taxpayer. So in return for that, they would receive the care and maintenance fund to as a compensation for having to operate that cemetery. So that's why we have a fund. That's why the fund, the price to establish the fund has increased.
But the thing is that the amount of money that a cemetery has for their care and maintenance fund and what they can use is only the interest, which these days is very low. So what do they do?
Well, it's a good question. The cemetery is a business and they have to run their numbers. Often cemeteries have not raised their prices to keep up with inflation. They're practically selling their lots at a loss. And so we encourage them to look at their business model. We are not there to provide business advice, but we see many cemeteries, especially in northern and rural communities, run by volunteer boards where the cemetery, you know, the average age of the board is 80 plus, and when they die off, these cemeteries are abandoned, and we start the court proceedings to transfer them to the municipality. Often, in these remote and rural circumstances, the cemetery, the municipality received no care and maintenance fund. There was never a fund created because this requirement only came into being 50, 60 years ago. And of course, we have hundreds, if not thousands of cemeteries that are 100, 200 years old.
I've also heard that there are circumstances in which you possibly would lower the fee of 165,000.
Correct. It's by exception. I will give you an example. There was a monastery that wanted to establish a cemetery on their grounds. The only people being buried in there would be the sisters who worked there. Well, then, knowing it's going to be tended by the monastery, knowing it's not a commercial enterprise, we asked the municipality, how do you feel about a reduced care and maintenance fund contribution? Because again, even if the monastery goes bankrupt, closes up, the cemetery is forever. So we asked the municipality, you know, if they support a reduced care and maintenance fund contribution, that will go into my determination whether I reduce or waive the contribution.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I see we are actually sort of past our end time, but I will extend it for another 10 minutes and then we will close up. Margot and Judith. Margot first.
Hi, Jim, thanks so much for your presentation. It was very informative. I have a couple questions. You were talking about the care and maintenance funds. Now, my understanding is that there's a care and maintenance payment when you get a plot, but also there's another type of care and maintenance that's the for the monument. And I have a couple questions about that because what's the monument maintenance supposed to be used for? How is it used? Because I walk through Mount Pleasant Cemetery frequently because I live right by it. And I see after windstorms and who knows what happens, that various monuments have been damaged and you can see parts of them on the ground. And, you know, Pam and I walk together sometimes and we wonder, do they use the care and maintenance funds for fixing these monuments? Because it doesn't seem that they ever do. And then I can't remember where I heard it related from a conversation from, I think it was Mike DeMello, about the ownership of the monuments. It was something like you purchase the monument, but then the cemetery owns them. And I thought that was sort of strange about the ownership. So those are I know there's a couple of disparate questions, but if you would be able to comment on sort of what you know about that, that would be great.
Sure. So you are correct. Whether you purchase a lot or a monument, there is a percentage that goes to the care maintenance fund for each purchase. And that is specifically to maintain the grounds and the monument. All monuments eventually deteriorate, and the restoration is done by the cemetery. And so that is why even if you purchase a monument or a marker, there is a care maintenance fee attached to that.
And do you keep track? Because I can tell you that I've lived next to Mount Pleasant Cemetery for 20 years, and I can tell you that I haven't really seen them taking care of the monuments. They're still broken, they're still there. I photograph them even. So is there anyone who, how do you log this? How do you ensure that this happens? You know, do you monitor year by year how much they have in their monument fund, and do they submit to you what's been used by
Absolutely.
Yeah.
On an annual basis, they must submit the care maintenance account. And not only that, we track how many lots they sold. We calculate how much should have been contributed to the care maintenance fund. And if that amount is less, we'll go back to them and say, how come the math doesn't add up? So we have financial compliance officers that do exactly that. But at the end of the day, you know, we're not there to manage the operations of a cemetery. We can only respond to complaints. And that's why it's important for us to educate consumers. And if they find that the lot is, the upkeeping has deteriorated and they want to file a formal complaint to us, we'll investigate it and provide a response to both the complainant and the cemetery.
Okay, because I just I don't know. I it's just been disappointing to me that I see that these many, you know, Mount Pleasant, the one at you know, Yonge and on Yonge Street, that's a very old cemetery, and it's historic for Toronto, and it's sort of disappointing as I see over the years the degradation of these monuments, and they're never repaired. And sometimes you'll see one of those orbs on the top, and it'll be, someone will sort of place it back near it, and then all of a sudden it's gone because Mount Pleasant, I guess they never fixed it. And then, you know, we and the families, we lose these monuments or pieces of them forever.
Often those orbs or other parts that have fallen off are removed for safekeeping to protect the safety of the public going through cemeteries. So that's a common practice as well. Or a monument might have leaned over, and so they deliberately tip it flat on the ground until it can be properly restored. So the backlog seems to continue to grow, especially with the older cemeteries. But that is precisely why we do not reduce the care and maintenance fund contribution at the beginning, because the costs come later on. And so although it may appear like a barrier for a cemetery to establish a cemetery, that fund comes in handy, and its value really becomes apparent after 50 or 100 years.
Right. And I think as Mount Pleasant's running out of space, what they do is they borrow against it. Don't they take the capital from some of it now? That's allowed. And now they've done these sort of gardens with the rocks so that they're actually into the capital of the maintenance fund.
Wow, you really know the act. So you can borrow, but not for improving the grounds. You can only borrow from the care maintenance fund for expansion. And so they have to increase capacity. There can be some minor beautification if you're creating a a columbarium, and then you need to landscape around that
Right,
a little bit.
right. I think that, yeah, especially on Young Street, there's that whole new little garden place,
Yeah.
and there are these rocks. And I think that my understanding is that they've gone to their capital to do this expansion. Although they haven't expanded the acreage, they have sort of expanded the number of people and
Capacity.
and they have intensified it.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Okay, then, if that is good, then we go to Judith and see her question.
I have two questions, actually. The first one is still on the care and maintenance funds. The 160, I'm not sure I understand. The $165,000, can it be used for ongoing maintenance, or is it only as protection for if the cemetery is in danger of not having anybody taking care of it?
Only the interest generated from the 165 and any other contributions from the sales of the lots can be used. Only the interest. And then
Can be used for what?
for maintenance.
Okay. Is there a separation between the $165,000 and the money that comes in as a result of sale of plots? Okay, so there's basically two funds that are called care and maintenance.
Well, there's the principal and the interest, and they can use the interest for their operations. And when a care and maintenance fund is above $500,000, they must submit audited financial statements. So that it's attested by a CPA, basically.
Okay, I'm still really confused. There's one fund.
There's the principal.
Which is the principal, which is the $165,000 when
that can never be touched, unless it never can be touched for operations.
And then there's the but into the same fund goes money from the sale of plots, and that can be used for operations.
No, again.
Oh, okay.
No,
So,
it cannot. No.
Okay, so it's only
a lot, when it's sold, 40% of that price can be contributed to the care and maintenance fund. And that cannot be used either. The principal just keeps growing.
Okay, so there's one fund for and the principal keeps growing, and the interest of it is used both for the ongoing maintenance of the cemetery and the care of it in perpetuity if something if everybody is not taking care of it anymore.
Yes, yeah. Well, that fund then gets transferred to the municipality in that event.
Oh, I see. Okay. The 165 or the 165 plus whatever came in from sales?
Yep. The 165 plus.
Yeah. Okay. My other question has to do with aquamation, and I know there's been some controversy about it over the years, and I wonder what your attitude is toward it, and whether I think there's one in Ontario, and whether there's any more in the works.
So there are 5 in Ontario.
Oh, okay.
There's one in Ottawa, run by the Pilon family. There's one in Kingston, one in Newcastle, one in Whitby, and one in Peterborough.
Oh. Okay, my information is way out of date then. Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that. Okay, those are my questions right now.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Jim. I have one more question, and I see that Margot still has her hands up. About composting. Is there any progress on that, human composting?
So no, there's so composting, also known as natural organic reduction. It's a trend. I think there are 7 states that have now legalized it, although there's still only limited number of areas. Like Washington State, I think, has 3 areas where they admit deceased for natural organic reduction. In Ontario, that research is still being done by the ministry. We regulate. We do not conduct the research. We do not pass the laws. We enforce the laws as a regulator. So the ministry is still looking at it. That's the Ministry of Public and Business Service Delivery. So they have policy advisors doing the research on that. They're consulting with Public Health Ontario. This was kind of put on the side during the pandemic. Public Health Ontario had bigger things to do, but I believe they're turning their attention back on that.
Okay, we have a few minutes more. Go ahead, Margot.
Thanks for indulging me. I did have another question, and it's about the consumer role on the BAO, because I know before that there was a point that there was not a single consumer who was on the board or any of the committees. It was all industry people, and maybe you had some people from other DAAs, what is it, designated authorities. But I was wondering what efforts the BAO has made to add consumers and their voices, because FAMS, as you can tell, we're interested and we want to learn and we want to help people, and this sort of role that FAMS has, it also, some of that one would think Ontarians would benefit from having those people on the board or on the committees. And I was wondering what the BAO does to foster in consumer participation and input to your everyday workings.
So our committees have had consumer reps, I think, since inception. However, our board itself had not. And last year, so we're just in the process of changing our bylaws. We need approval by the minister, which should come hopefully in May or before the House rises in June, where he approves our new bylaw that explicitly lays out the role of a consumer rep, being one of the 10 board members. As a reminder, we have currently 3 skills-based directors. We have 3 directors that are the chairs of our advisory committees. So the funeral advisory committee, the cemetery crematorium advisory committee, and the faith-based. All 3 have their chairs, but by virtue of being the chair of the advisory committee, are part of our board. And so we had 4 skills-based. There's now going to be 3, and we're repurposing one to be the consumer rep. The person we identified last year, her name, I'm gonna just look it up, is Laura Tamblin Watts. Laura is the CEO of CanAge, Canada's Seniors Advocacy Organization. So she is an advocate. She is a lawyer. And so she represents consumers formally on our board.
Okay.
Our board has never been 100% represented by industry. We've at the most, we've had 2 or 3 members, and those would be the chairs of those advisory committees I mentioned.
Okay, great, thank you. Margot, I see that Ann Atkinson has her hand up, and I allow that, and I have to shut you off, sorry. Ann, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, in the last 30, 40 years, if cemeteries are as popular as they used to be.
Very good question. I would say that before the pandemic, 70% of dispositions, and sorry for using such a cold term, but 70% of dispositions were cremation because of the pandemic and the limited numbers that could attend a visitation. We're up almost 80% are now cremation. There are some religions, of course, Judaism, Islam, that continue to require a burial. But that is the trend right now we see. And of course, part of that trend is because cremations are generally cheaper than an interment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question before we end?
Okay, last question, really. Okay, Phil,
Yes.
go ahead.
And it's a short one. Okay, throughout the province, many churches have cemeteries under property or nearby. As we know, many of these congregations today are struggling. Some have closed and will close. What will happen to the cemeteries when these churches are no longer?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it is a trend. And as I said earlier, the cemetery is forever, which means, and a number of churches are being purchased for their real estate potential. Some are turned into banquet halls, some are turned into homes. And what is required, and so the purchaser needs to know whatever vision they have for the church building, that if the property includes a cemetery, they become the de facto operator of the cemetery. To protect the cemetery, that owner can apply to close, like to sever the property so the church is separated from the cemetery. And then as long as they identify an operator for the cemetery to continue in perpetuity. It could be the same owner, they could sell that, but you are absolutely right. Lots of churches, due to dwindling congregations, the fact that the cemetery board is, elderly, and many of these churches or cemeteries are inactive. They haven't had a burial in years. So, and they don't actively sell either. But it still requires to be licensed and protected. And so that is the process. They'd have to close, they have to sever the property where the church, and then can repurpose the church designation from cemetery to residential or commercial.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jim and Philip. You're happy? Yeah? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your speech and presentation. Jim, I think we learned a lot. I certainly did. And thank you again. And we hope to see you back sometime for a webinar or whatever, if it is something new coming up. I'm going to share the screen to close off some resources. We have, of course, the Bereavement Authority of Ontario, the BAO.ca. Do include the THE. And then our own website, FAMS.ca, a nice short one. We have our previous webinars and presentations on youtube.com/@FAMSmedia1957. And then click on tab videos, you will get them all to look at. Facebook, we could need some help on that, FAMS Ontario. And questions and remarks can be sent to info@fams.ca. And we will see you in September. Look out for a newsletter. And thank you for being with us, and spread the word about FAMS and stay safe.